stereotypical pastor was one who graduated from 3 years of seminary, or some of us are on the 8-year plan. We left seminary, we came in and took a church that, even if it didn't pay full time, was considered full time. The idea of lay pastors really was not that common back then, but as we have seen the dynamics changing through the years in our churches, then I think that has become more and more of a reality. And I know, having been on the regional enhancement team, I saw how that was becoming more of a reality for us. So that's really how I got involved with the lay studies. And also, since I'm also a church consultant, I also have a consulting ministry where I go in and work with churches in a consulting role. I'm certified through the Society for Church Consultants. I've been able to do some consulting with congregations. So when I was on the committee, they said, well, since you do consulting and you do workshops, will you do this one? So here I am. So, okay. Now, George, the screen looks a little bit blurry. Is there something that can clarify that a little bit? Has everybody seen the screen as being a little blurry?
Mine looks fine.
Well, my screen looks fine, but I don't have an Apple product, so that probably is wrong.
Okay, mine, okay, that's okay. I just want to make sure everybody sees it okay. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide there, George. I'd like to just talk a little bit about mentoring from the standpoint of what Scripture teaches. Okay, and I'm not going to read all these scriptures. I'm going to kind of highlight some of them, but there are a number of passages, and a number of these you can study on your own, but I will read some of them. Obviously, the first one, of course, it's often equated with the word discipleship, and one who is a learner or a pupil. A disciple is a learner or a pupil. And of course, we know in Matthew 28 is the Great Commission, where it says, go and make disciples or learners of all the nations. In Luke chapter 6, verses 39 and 40, Jesus tells this parable. He says, can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a pit? The student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. Interesting passage of scripture. Then, of course, in John chapter 1, 35 to 45, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but what that passage talks about, of course, is a whole chain of mentoring that's going on. And even if it's a kind of the calling of the disciples, but we basically go from John the Baptist to Nathaniel, and there's a whole chain of people that are coming to Christ. And one is sharing with the other one about Jesus and the Messiah. And of course, what I think was really remarkable about that passage is that, one of them was John's disciples, but when he saw Jesus, he decided to follow him. So again, I think that is a significant thing in and of itself. Of course, in 2 Timothy, there's a number of passages where between the relationship between the Apostle Paul and Timothy. And let me just read you verse 13. That 2 Timothy 1:13 says, what you have heard from me, keep as a pattern of sound teaching with faith and hope in Christ Jesus. What you have heard from me is the key there. And then in verses 10 to 14, you, however, know all about my teachings, my way of life, my purpose, faith, patience, and love, and endurance, persecutions and sufferings, what kinds of things happened to me in Antioch, and so forth. I'm not going to read the rest of that, but again, you have learned from me, Timothy. These are things that I went through, and Paul talking to Timothy. Of course, in the book of Acts, there's a number of passages. In Acts 2:42 is where they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. And then in Acts 9, verses 10 to 18, that is where Saul of Tarsus became a believer in Jesus Christ. And of course, Ananias had to kind of lead him along and mentor him and kind of get him acclimated, getting the Apostle Paul acclimated to the things of faith. And there's a number, like I say, of passages that talk about that. And of course, in the Thessalonian church, again, let me just read you some of that. It says, for we know, brothers and sisters, loved by God, that he has chosen you, because our gospel came to you not simply with words, but also with power, with the Holy Spirit and deep conviction. You know how we lived among you for your sake. You became imitators of us and of the Lord, for you welcomed the message in the midst of severe suffering with the joy given by the Holy Spirit. And so you became a model to all believers of Macedonia and Achaia. And so again, there's that kind of that chain of modeling and mentoring really that's going on. Now, they didn't use the word mentoring like we use it, but I think you get the idea that scripture is loaded of examples of, of God's truth being passed on to another person. And that's what disciple making is, what teaching those in the faith is all about. So I think there's a strong, very strong biblical evidence for mentoring. Now, with that in mind, what I'd like to do, and by the way, what way we're going to do this, I will go slide by slide. And then if you have comments or questions or just something, a thought, I will give opportunity for you to share those comments and questions. When those of you who have taken my lay studies class, that's basically the way we did it. I would go through a slide and then you would have some chances to comment, ask questions. And by the way, I do have my panel of experts here. Leon, of course, Leon Oaksley has been leading our committee, our illustrious committee, for a number of years now. And of course, Jim Kelsey, he's going to be doing a part of this workshop later on when he talks about boundaries. He'll be doing that section. But feel free, and George Stefani is also on our committee. So whatever I miss, I'm expecting you guys to pick up the slack of the things I don't know. So, because you're the experts. You know, what do they say that experts built the Titanic and amateurs built the Ark. I heard that too, but that's a whole other story. But anyways, okay, so we'll go to the next slide there, George, and like to just look at the purpose and expectations of mentors. All right. Okay, a mentor is an experienced and trusted advisor and guide who works closely with a lay study student as he or she prepares to become a certified lay pastor. Okay, and so these are the expectations we have of what we can expect as mentors. And by the way, we will get more specific about that later as we talk more about that. But this is kind of the overview of your purpose and general expectations. Okay, the first thing that I want to talk about, some of the expectations would be that when you are working with a person going through the lay pastor program, I need to make that distinction. You're going to be there to offer support, guidance, and direction. You know, you're going to be working with them through their course load, but also through their ministry issues. And you're going to just be providing support, guidance, and direction. That's going to be one of the expectations that you can have in working with people. The second thing that I see there that I also want to communicate with you is that you'll be meeting regularly with the student with at least one meeting per course. Now, you can meet more than that, obviously, if you want to, but at least that you're in regular communication with that student. One of the things that we talked about on our lay studies committee is really, we've talked about the guidelines, but we never really maybe, I don't want to use the word enforce, that sounds kind of hard, but we never really had much accountability with that. And I think we want to do a better job with encouraging this to happen. We have a number of students that are through the program, and we want to be able to make sure that happens, that you're meeting with them regularly, and that they're not only getting the support that they need, but that you're meeting with them. You can talk about their course load, you can talk about a number of things with them. The third thing that is there is sharing your own experiences in managing ministry responsibilities. I cannot emphasize that enough. I'll tell you what, one thing I realized, this year I will have been ordained since 1981. That's hard. I mean, that's 40 years. Where do the years go? I mean, where do the years go? But one of the things I think that I am at an advantage is now I can tell people all the mistakes that I made in these 40 years. Also some of the successes too. But you learn. I'll tell you what. For those of you, all of you who are in ministry, have you ever had a day where you go, why did I do that? That was just dumb. Why did I do that? And I think that's where we can be very helpful to people that, maybe saying, maybe we can ask the right questions, maybe you ought to consider, or what do you think about this situation? How would you handle that? There's a lot of things, boy, I tell you, hindsight's always 2020. And again, but I think sharing our experiences, how do we handle ministry responsibilities? What are some of the nuts and bolts? One thing I realized through the years, that everything we need to learn, we did not learn in seminary. And it was learned by doing. It was sometimes on the seat of your pants. And I think that's where those of us who have had experience in ministry can be real helpful to people who maybe are just starting out. The next one, which Jim is going to talk a lot more about later, is keeping all discussions confidential. He's going to kind of talk about because, the thing is, as you will see, we're going to be talking about the fact of being able to recommend students and being able to do certain things, but he's going to talk about the boundaries of that. And that's at the end of our session. He's going to be having a number of slides that will be dealing with that. The next thing here, and I'll talk more about this as well, is that one of the expectations for a mentor is to assist the student in identifying a field project. Now, as mentors, you're going to be primarily working with the student while they complete their coursework. But then once and I'll talk more about this process, so I'm not going to go into detail too much yet on it. But once they're done with their coursework, then they will be doing a field project. That will be another person, most likely the field supervisor, that will be leading the student through that. You're going to have that first part of that as mentors. That doesn't mean you can't have a relationship beyond that, but your main mentoring role will be while they are doing their coursework. And you'll be assisting those students, however, to help identify what a good field project would be. We had one student who just went through the program who's working as a part-time chaplain at a hospital. In fact, he's involved with their hospice work, and that he went through our lay studies program. Again, he went through the whole 9 yards. He had a mentor. I actually mentored him, and then he had his field work was at the hospital, and now the hospital has hired him on as a hospice chaplain and their hospice division of that particular hospital. So again, part of the job of a mentor is to help the student identify what would be a good project. It could be in a local church setting. It could be in a licensed lay pastor situation. It could be in a chaplaincy type of thing. There are a number of things that it could be. So again, that's where you as a mentor can be helpful. You begin to know what their gifts are and maybe areas that might be of interest to them, that kind of thing. And then of course, just generally providing resources for the student, as the need arises. So these are just basically the general purposes and expectations of mentors. Before we move on, do any of you have any comments or questions that you would like to, or an observation or something that maybe had struck you about any of these things that I shared so far?
Yeah, Steve?
Yeah.
Dennis Christensen. A couple of questions. One bullet here says we will meet regularly with the student, at least one meeting per course. Is that one meeting per course after the individual decides that they want to get the certificate, or is it one meeting for all 16 of the courses, regardless of when they identify?
That would be for one meeting for all 16 courses. So basically, in a nutshell, probably 16 times, you'd be meeting. If they're taking like church history, you'd be meeting them at least once during that course or whatever. I suppose if they're taking 2 courses at a time, again, maybe Leon or Jim, you might, or George, you might shed further light on that. Obviously, they may be taking more than 1 course at a time. You'd be meeting with them for multiple courses, but the idea would be that you wouldn't wait until they're done with all their courses and then decide to meet with them, but that you're meeting with them regularly as they're going through the coursework.
Let me ask you this. Suppose that I'm taking lay study courses just because I want to be a lay leader in my church. I take 6 courses. And then after the 6th course, I say, well, you know, God is calling me maybe to be a lay pastor. So I indicate I want to become a certified lay minister. At that point, I'm assigned a mentor, right?
Right.
So, and that from that point on, then for the next 10 courses, the mentor would meet with me once I'm assigned that mentor, which may not be for the full 16 courses.
Right. That's true. And that's true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. There are different levels of lay studies. There's, and we'll talk about, there's a couple of certificates. Our main thing here is for lay pastors, the studies in being a lay pastor. But again, just hold on that a little bit, because we will talk a little bit about that. But that's a good point. So it's possible it may not be for all those courses. They're halfway through, or they get done with those core classes, and then decide I feel called to be a lay pastor. Then indeed the mentorship would kick in then. That's a good point.
Okay, so my other question was, we are to assist a student in identifying a field project.
Mhm.
What is the role of the field supervisor in helping identify that project? Where do those two connect, or do they?
Good question. This is a work in progress, definitely. I would say that, my opinion, again, and the rest of the members of the team can feel free to interject on this. My feeling would be, if the student is kind of looking for what to do as a field project, I think that would be our role. But once they are actually in the field project, that's when the field supervisor would take over, or the person who's mentoring them during that supervision would take over. So I think our role would kind of cease at that point, would end at that point when they're done with their actual coursework, because the field work follows their coursework. That's like the next step towards being a lay pastor. So I would say, if they're kind of looking and wrestling with what they're going to be doing, and they're finishing up their coursework, that would be our role to maybe help them. But then once they get into the field study, or maybe if they're inquiring, let's say, about a chaplaincy job or something like that, I think once they would be appointed to that position, then the field supervisor would take over after they start that. Leon or Jim or George, any other comments to that? Did I hit that about right?
I think so. The thing I would say, Dennis, is that for so many, we've had a number of students who didn't have a mentor going through this. They took all their coursework, and then the crisis of, what am I going to do with the field? How am I going to do field work? And in those last courses, and they're beginning to think about that, they got a mentor to work with them at that point. And that became the important thing of figuring out, where do I go now? Especially if it's something other than just going to a church, but I think the idea here is that it's something you begin talking about, and that the mentor should be raising that question, helping them, so when they get done with the coursework, they're ready to move into something rather than it being a crisis. I want to get this lay certification, but I don't know what the field assignment's going to be.
Right.
We've got several people right now who are wanting to do a field assignment, but because of the pandemic, lots of opportunities have been shut down.
Right.
And I know Phyllis is working with somebody now to try to figure out how to do that. But that's an important role. I mean, that's a person who's on board with the person as they're thinking that through. The other thing I would mention is that when we say your role is done when the coursework's over, that's really a program official designation. That we don't consider you anymore the mentor. You fulfilled your responsibility, but hopefully you've created a lifetime relationship that will go on. That's not our role, but as a program, the field minister, it says, becomes the mentor at that point. And the supervisor, he'll make a recommendation, and he or she will make a recommendation at the end of and then that all goes to the committee to give the final certificate.
I had a question. On the field ed paper that I have in front of me, it talks about the minimum requirements of a field ed project. I have a couple questions. One, do we have any contact with the supervisor that we're going to turn our student over to? Or is the student the one that takes the requirements to the field ed supervisor to let her know what's required? And then the second question is it says the supervisor will prepare a written evaluation of the student's field ed and send the report to the association lay study committee and the committee on ministry. And my question is could we also get a copy of that so that we know the progress of our student or what the final report was?
That's a great question. Any of my team members want to answer that? That's passing the buck. That's a great question.
Again, I think what I would say, Phyllis, is officially, I think the way the program's set up, no, it's not your, but I would think you've invested in this person. They would probably share that with you. I mean, I don't see it as we're cutting somebody out of the role, but officially, it moves on to the next step. And one of the issues about association committees is, do you have an association committee that's active to receive that report or not? And that's something we as the region are trying to make sure each person has that. Either the regional committee or an association committee would be making sure those things happen.
We will be addressing that a little bit more later, the process. I think that's a great question for us. And I think Leon really hit it on the head. What we are talking here basically are more of the organizational part of this in terms of what your role as a mentor would be. But if you want to have an ongoing relationship with them, and if the student wants to volunteer that information with you, and if you have a relationship, I mean, we would not discourage that. We're looking at this more from the administrative end of things, and to have a little bit more guidelines about what we're actually doing. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this workshop today, to at least give us a framework to work with. However you want to do that, though, beyond that framework, we're not opposed to that. It's just that we really felt we at least needed to have a skeleton to work with, like a framework to work with. So I think that's kind of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking was because I'm sure that as they apply someplace, they're going to put us down as a reference.
Yeah.
And the field ed is when they finally, when the tires hit the pavement and they really put what they've learned into action. And that's why I was just wondering if we would get some kind of input as to, how they made out or their strengths or their weaknesses or whatever, because, again, we want to give them a positive, reference. And if we didn't know anything at all about that portion, and there again, I'm sure they would share that with us, but do they also get a copy of what the supervisor is sending to the lay committee? Or is that only going to the lay committee?
I would think they would be getting, I would think they'd be getting a copy of that. Anybody want to answer on that? I would think, I think a lot of what you're saying, though, is it depends on the relationship you have with the student in terms of being able to carry that stuff on. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I think certainly I would say if you have been investing in a person like that, depending on the relationship, I think really, yeah, I would hope. It's not part of maybe the administrative aspects that we're doing, but certainly relational. And we want to be very relational with this. And we'll talk more about that as we move on some further slides, because I think that, I don't want it to just be kind of, because I think that was one of the issues before. Well, we got to meet with them once a month. Once a course, and let's do the administrative. But we also are hoping that it goes beyond just administratively. And again, we'll be addressing that later on. I do have some other things I'm going to be sharing with that. So.
Well, I know that, I know the one I'm mentoring. That relationship will go on forever.
Yeah.
I was one of the people who went all the way through the program and then got assigned a mentor for my field ed. So I realized the advantage of having that relationship. So thank you for those questions.
Okay, well, thank you for, yeah, those are challenging too, and I think they're and good ones to ask, because it definitely, it's going to, I think it's, and one of the things we're realizing as a late studies committee, this is still a work in progress. We're still trying to, make this work much more efficiently than we've had in the past, and these kinds of questions will be good for us as we kind of wrestle with, okay, how's this all going to look in a more focused kind of way than maybe it hasn't in the past. So. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Okay, if not, let's go to that next slide, George, thank you. And then, so how are mentors picked, and what are the selection and qualifications of mentors? Okay, here are some basic qualifications. First of all, the Association Lay Studies Committee, which is called the ALSC, boy, doesn't that sound fancy, compiles a list of mentors. Okay, now just hold off on that for a minute, but they basically, each association's Lay Studies Committee will one of their jobs is to find a list of potential mentors. And that's where they know the people in their association who might be qualified to do that, or who have the right credentials in terms of ministry, and they've been in ministry. So that primarily starts with the association. Okay, in consultation with the second bullet, in consultation with the student, the ALSC assigns a mentor to a student seeking certification. So again, working with the student, if they have their list of mentors, and so the Association Lay Studies Committee will assign a mentor to a student seeking certification. Now, here's the big one, because we all know in our ABC NYS life that not every association is operational. Let's call it like it is. Some associations, they're very well put together in terms of having a lay studies committee. Some associations are barely meeting, if meeting at all. I know at least one, and probably more, that aren't even really meeting. So in the absence of that, and we want to be sensitive to that, and we've talked a lot about this on our committee. In the absence of an associational lay studies team or committee, the regional lay studies team will help assist in the assignment process. We are in the process, of course, this is one of the reasons we're doing this workshops, is to identify some people who we feel that would be gifted in the mentoring area. We're trying to see what the interest was out there, but we also have been working and trying to identify some potential people who could be mentors to people. And that's an ongoing process, by the way. And so we, if there's not the associational level help, we as a regional lay studies committee would be glad to help assign in the assignment process. And I mean, the region is the region is here to work in partnership as much as possible that we can. And again, this workshop is an example of that. We're trying to identify those who are interested in being mentors, and this is an important part of the process. So again, if you're an association, you haven't been meeting in 10 years, and you don't have a committee or any of that stuff, don't hesitate to contact Leon, who's the chair, or any one of us, and we will bring that up at the meeting, and we'll try to do everything we can to help in the assignment process. So I just wanted to just lay that out for you. It's recommended that the mentor should not be the pastor of the student. And I think one of the factors behind that is, it's a different kind of relationship than just a normal pastoring relationship. Now, I will admit there may be times where that is not possible. I mean, this is not according to the law, it's according to grace. But the idea there is that the mentor has a very specific function of being able to work with the student as they are seeking being a lay pastor. And so it's kind of a different role than what the pastor would normally be doing with that student. But again, there are times where maybe that's not always realistic or possible. But again, this is what this is the recommendation that we have. And Again, and when we're done with the slide, if any of you have questions about that, I'll let my team members maybe elaborate a little bit further on that than I have so far. And then mentors, and here's a very important thing. Mentors should either be ordained or certified lay pastors who are able to lead persons new to ministry. Obviously, we don't want somebody who's still going through the lay studies program, haven't finished yet, to be a mentor quite yet. But I mean, once they have been involved in ministry, have gone through either they've been ordained and they've been serving in ministry, or it's a certified lay pastor. Peggy shared earlier about her work in her church and the work she's been doing as a lay pastor. Those are the people that we want, people who are able to lead somebody who hasn't gone, who's still in the process, who are new to ministry, and to be there as kind of a person to encourage and to guide them. So again, those are just some of the, how we select and some of the qualifications. At this time, I will welcome any comments, questions, and maybe my other team members can fill me in on anything that I might have lacked saying there. So let's just spend a second doing that. If we're good. We good there?
I just have a question. This is Peggy. So the Adirondack Association doesn't, we don't have a lay pastor team. So that, so me being part of the Adirondack Association kind of leaves me out of that situation. Let's say nobody in the Adirondack Association is in need of a mentor, and I do meet the qualifications. Would I possibly be assigned to somebody else in a different association?
My answer to that is yes, I believe. And my other teammates' comments on that, yeah, I would say, yeah, I think there may be occasions where that might happen.
Yeah, Phyllis is mentoring somebody from another association. That's not uncommon.
I think the idea, Peggy, is that with this is that by your going through this, we can put your name on a list for an association who's working with somebody to have a mentor. Your name can go on that as a person who would be willing to be a mentor. And, somehow that person is going to get connected to somebody. Basically, I mean, we can't assign a mentor. The student needs to be involved in the process of selecting a mentor. And so we want to make sure we've got names to present to them of people who would be willing to do that.
Okay.
I guess I would add, Peggy, I see that as sort of a natural extension of the cooperative relationship between the Adirondack and CABA. That, oftentimes we're doing things together or sharing resources. So even though you may not have a lay study student in the Adirondack region, if we do, and now we do have a couple, then I would see that as sort of a natural interaction between those two associations to bring you on board to mentor somebody in CABA.
Yeah.
That was a good question, Peggy. This is Howie. Because North Country Association, I don't know that we have anybody pursuing lay studies currently, and we don't have a committee. So good to be able, and we have the technology, we can do that. So
Yeah.
Good question, and it answered the question. You asked the question I was going to ask, so thank you.
I think with the technology, you're right. This is actually much more doable now that we're getting more familiar with, I mean, I guess one of the blessings of the pandemic is that doing mentoring by conference call like this is much more doable now that we're getting more familiar with it. So, I mean, ideally it'd be nice to meet in person, but we know how things are right now. And if it's a person who lives in the western part of the state and needs a mentor, it's definitely very doable. So anyways, any other questions before we move on? If not, George, let's go on to the next slide there. Okay, this one is what I thought would be helpful is to have you, if you're not familiar with it, is to kind of go through what a student goes through to become a lay pastor. Now, I will tell you, this is a crash course. So I don't pretend that this is going to be the most exhaustive thing in the world, but I want you to notice that there is a link. If you go to the American Baptist NYS website, there's a link on the lay studies program. They will give you, there's a number of PDF files there. They will give you the ins and outs of, on that website, of what your role is. I want you, as for those of you who are in this course today, your main area of interest will be that first bullet. That first bullet. Now, George is going to show you a document which will pop up now from that website. This is the PDF file. So he's going to open that. Okay, so just hang on a second here. Hopefully it pops up. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So anyways, this is one of the documents found on that website. And again, I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time in this, but I think it would be helpful for you as mentors to help to see what your role is going to be in terms of this. There are basically, in the certification program, there are really 3 certificates. We're going to look at the first and third one here. Okay, so if we could just scroll up a little bit, there's what's called the Certificate in Local Church Leadership. These are kind of the core courses. Okay, so there's Baptist Heritage, Basic Christian Beliefs, Christian Ethics, Church Administration, Ministry to Individuals, New Testament, Old Testament, and Spiritual Development. And the thing I want to talk about there is that every student that's going through the lay studies program, whether they become a lay pastor or not, would take these core courses. And some students go through this program just wanting a certificate in local church leadership. There's also a certificate in advanced church leadership, but I'm going to skip over that. But this is kind of the core of courses that gets them going. Okay, now if we could pop down to the certificate in lay pastoral studies, you will notice, and this again is where you're going to be involved as mentors. Okay, so they take those initial courses, and as Jim said earlier, they very well may take those core courses and decide that God's calling them into being a lay pastor. So then they want to pursue a certificate in lay pastoral studies. That's when the mentor would really take over. They might decide that before, but you know, they may decide in the process once they receive that first certificate. Now, once they receive that first certificate, if you notice the requirements, number 1 is once they earn that certificate in local church leadership, okay, and that's what we talked about before, that begins then the process where they can begin to pursue a certificate in lay pastoral studies. And this is where you're going to be involved most heavily. So that therefore, and of course, some of the requirements is that they maintain an active membership in an ABC church, ABC NYS church. They consult regularly with a mentor. We talked about that, appointed by the Association Lay Study Committee, or if they don't have one, by the Regional Lay Study Committee. And then they have to, in order to move towards certification, they have to successfully complete the following courses. Christian education, and this is on top of the courses I already mentioned. You know, we already talked about the core courses. They got that certificate. Once they get that certificate, then they would complete these courses: Christian education, church history, introduction to Christian counseling, ministry to the small church, preaching, and worship. And then after that, number 5 would be, then they would meet with representatives of the Association Lay Studies Committee to plan field work. Okay, and then they would have to successfully complete their supervised field work. And so this is really, your involvement will be right up to about step 5, but certainly the first 4 steps will be your primary involvement as mentors. That's that first bullet that I showed you. So if we could go back to the PowerPoint, George, again, I'll reemphasize that this can all be found on the website if you need to research it further and so forth. So if we could go back to the PowerPoint there. It takes just a second here. Okay, again, you're going to be involved in that first bullet, earn certificate in lay pastoral studies. And then you notice I have it slash coursework, field study, mentoring, and then again, more details. And I just showed you one of those documents there. Now, the student is not done yet, but your role, unless you want to have an ongoing relationship, is pretty well done in this first bullet. But then here's what happens. And the reason why I'm doing this is I thought it would be helpful for you to understand what the student goes through to get certified as a lay pastor. So at least you're aware of where they need to go and what's going to happen. So after they have completed their field work, they've met with the Association of Lay Studies Committee, they've done all that stuff, they've gone through the coursework, then they would meet with the Association Committee on Ministry or a representative to review certification requirements. And here's what they have to do in order to go the next step. And when they are meeting with the Committee on the Ministry, they obviously have to maintain an active ministry in an ABC NYS church. They have to provide 3 references, current pastor and 2 others to Association Committee on Ministry. They must receive an endorsement by a local church leadership. They must submit a paper of 3 to 4 pages reflecting biblical and theological understanding. They must sign a signed copy of the Minister Council Code of Ethics and then they have to provide evidence that the candidate has completed training on boundaries, ethics, and behavior. And again, these are things they would do when they meet with the Committee on the Ministry. It's not Lay Studies Committee at this point. This is actually the Committee on Ministry that would also handle ordained pastors and people that are seeking ordination and that kind of thing, or recognition of ordination. And so that's when they would be meeting with the Committee on Ministry. We had in the Living Waters recently, Leroy Woodruff has just gone through the whole program. He's the one that's working actually as a hospice chaplain. And I was on the Living Waters Committee on the Ministry, and we went through all these steps with him, and he had to read his paper. We asked him all kinds of questions and that kind of thing. And so again, these were things that he had to have in place. Now, if you go down there, it says the last thing it says is that then he would actually meet with the association, he or she, the student or the candidate would meet with the Association Committee on Ministry for final review. What we did, like with Leroy, we listened to his paper, we asked questions, we had the signed copies of the Code of Ethics, we had all these different requirements that were met here, and then we approved him to become a licensed lay pastor. And what we did is then we sent that to the Committee on the Ministry of our association, sent that to the Regional Committee on the Ministry, and they basically also approved of his licensing as a licensed lay pastor, being certified as a lay pastor. And so again, we worked in close cooperation. The Committee on the Ministry worked on the associational level, worked in close relationship with the Regional Committee on Ministry. And again, he went through that whole process. But your primary role will be that first bullet. But I really felt it's very important for you to understand what happens when a student and what they have to go through to get there. Okay, any questions or comments? I know that's a lot here. Again, I would encourage you to look at that website. Again, I would hope, I know some of you are, I would assume this is something that the regional office could do, that a copy of this PowerPoint could be sent and the links and everything in case you don't have it. But again, I would say that if you look at that website and the region about Lay Studies program, that talks a lot about this. And again, I'm kind of hitting it in a very quick way, but I know at least this gives you an overview of the process they go through. Any comments? Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question on number 8, where it says provide evidence of satisfactory completion of training approved by ABC on boundaries, ethics, and standards of behavior. Now, I know about the boundaries class. What certifies ethics and standard of behavior?
Okay, Jim, maybe you can answer that one for me.
It's all a single experience. Boundaries, ethics, and behavior. That's it. If you go through the boundary training program, then that would cover. It's
okay, because that was a question of Bonnie's, and I knew when we when we did before the committee of ministry, we had to sign 2 papers, and I didn't know if those were the 2 papers. And so I just need clarification. So thank you.
That comes up, one paper you signed was the Minister's Council Code of Ethics. We also, although it doesn't say here, we also asked people to sign a code of conduct as well, which those are just 2 documents.
Okay, so that is going to be a one of the documents they sign then. Okay, all
Code of
right,
Ethics
thank you.
and the Code of conduct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I would just pass along in terms of experience on the other end as being on an association lay study committee. We had a candidate that came through from another association. We're working cooperatively. It wasn't Peggy, it was something else. And one of the things that having a mentor involvement would have been significant for us was on that paper, the 3 to 4 page paper, because essentially the person wrote it without a sounding board. And it was, we went through 2 or 3 iterations before we could really get a paper that was cogent. So although it's not a requirement, I would recommend that if you're mentoring somebody, offer to read their paper before they submit it. I mean, they could choose not to, but I think that would have been invaluable to this person that was going before the committee, because it was very, very difficult when we met reading the paper without anybody else having sort of critiqued it.
And I think that, I mean, and especially if, obviously, if the mentor has an ongoing relationship, even beyond what they did during the coursework, if they still have a relationship, yeah, I think that's one thing that, you know, it might not be a bad thing to encourage a student, you know, even if it's beyond our official relationship, you know, that make sure, or at least you find someone that can at least, if nothing else, correct your grammar. I mean, I know one person I know, they had their well, you know, I know when Leroy went through, he had his pastor go over it with him, and he did do that, and that was very well done. I mean, he and his pastor had worked on it, and I think that's. But if they're in a situation they don't have a pastor in the church or something like that, find somebody, whether it's the mentor that mentored them, somebody for them to kind of be a sounding board. And to be able to, because that does create a issue for the committee on the ministry and for the lay studies committee and stuff like that, to be able to deal with that sometimes. Again, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, as just going through it, you know, like I said, you know, a little over a year ago, I really have to strongly advise, at least advising people to do that paper, because George was extremely helpful in so many ways. And even though you've gone through the learning process, that writing that paper, in my situation, I'd never had to write a paper similar to that. So that was extremely helpful. It was a continuation of the learning process, I feel. So I would highly recommend that. That's really good advice, George.
And that paper really is so important because it really helps you to think theologically. We all know, we went through it, for those of us who have been seminary trained, we had to do it with our ordination and everything. And I think for anybody going through that, it really helps them articulate what they believe about theology and ministry. And I think that but people who have not done that before, without any kind of guidance, it can be kind of just an awesome task of trying to know how to deal with that. So I think that's a very good point. Absolutely.
I'm curious about the paper itself. Submit a paper of 3 to 4 pages reflecting biblical theological understanding, kind of open-ended. Is there a guideline skeleton to help people create their thoughts so they cover the material that a committee on ministry is looking for?
Good question. Isn't in the committee on the ministry, and Jim, maybe you know this, isn't there like some sort of a guideline on how that paper's to be written of some sort? Wasn't there? I'm just trying to think of all the documentation. I've seen.
In the handbook, there's a guideline for people who are having their ordination, who are being ordained or having an ordination recognized. I don't know whether there is a guideline in there for certified lay ministers. What we could do is we could look at what's in the handbook on ordination for people having their ordination recognized, and see if we might insert something in the lay study guide, in the lay study piece about that.
Yeah.
I think it's in the lay study guide, Jim.
It is. Yeah, there's different sections that they want you to focus on. So yes, there is, because I specifically remember that, and I was very thankful that was there to help guide me.
Those of us who's come through the lay study program and then went on to become a pastor, I always, when I'm mentoring someone, and this will be the third one I've mentored, when it comes to that point, I give them a copy of what my paper looked like, just so it gives them some idea where to start or how to put their own personal life into that paper. So that's an advantage for those of us who've already come through lay study.
Yeah.
Steve, the one thing I would reiterate is just, it's not officially the role of the mentor to work with this, but you're uniquely positioned, having gotten to know this person and they've built their trust. You're in a unique position to help someone with that if that's the way it works out.
Right. Yeah, it's not part of the official stuff we're talking about, but you're right. If you have a relationship with them, by all means, I think that's some really good suggestions there, and absolutely. I mean, I think it's part of what we call discipleship, of teaching, and that's a really good, and it's probably not even a bad exercise while they're going through their course load to say, hey, write me a paper, just see what it looks like. I don't know, just to kind of, help guide them, because sooner or later they're going to have to do that. I don't think it hurts at any time, really.
I think Paul Bailey, in teaching the basic Christian beliefs course, usually says that to his students is, you're going to have to write this paper at some point. This is what you're working on now in this course. So that's another way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other things here? Any questions or comments on this particular page? If not, I think we should do is get up for about 1 or 2 minutes and just stretch. Because I know how Zoom calls work, and I got to go up and get myself a glass of water. My throat is drying up. I don't like going 2 hours straight with this stuff. So let's stretch. It is currently 5 after 11. Let's plan on let's come back about 13 after. Let's do about 3 minutes. This stretch. Be right back in 3 minutes.
Steve, I'm just showing, sharing from the manual, the handbook, what those principal elements are of that paper.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I see. Okay.
So that's right in the manual already.
I thought I saw it somewhere, but you know, there's so many manuals. I vaguely remember seeing it. Okay, as soon as everybody's back, I think we can go to that next slide, George. Hopefully everybody's back. I think I might have said the wrong time, but too many things on my brain right now. Okay, the next thing we're going to be talking about, and hopefully we're all back, is expectations for mentors. This gets a little bit more specific about what our expectations are, or what we felt, and we talked about this in the Lay Studies Committee, what we felt some of the expectations should be. And we went over this quite a bit. But basically, I broke it down into 4 main things that I want to emphasize. First of all, is to give an honest recommendation regarding the student's progress in fulfilling all coursework. Okay, and that's the first thing that we felt is an important expectation, to give an honest recommendation. Okay, secondly, giving accurate and honest feedback to the Association Lay Studies Committee or the regional one, in case you don't have one. The honest feedback, and also the fieldwork supervisor and the student, giving honest feedback to the fieldwork supervisor, the student, that there's an honest discussion about this. Okay, the third expectation is assisting the student through the coursework until course requirements are fulfilled. Fieldwork supervisor assumes responsibility as mentor during the fieldwork project. We already talked about that. Again, that does not mean you'd have to end your relationship. This is more of an administrative thing. Again, if you have a wonderful relationship with the student, then by all means, continue that relationship. This is merely to more of an administrative comment. And then, of course, the fourth thing, maybe you don't have a wonderful relationship with a student. Hopefully that never happens. Then, so there'd be a problem arise then with the mentoring situation, or if support is needed, then you contact the Association Lay Studies Committee or the regional one if that doesn't apply. Again, hopefully that will never happen, but you know, again, one thing that, you know, sometimes there may be an issue that arises, and we did want to at least bring that up, and that you would feel support in the event that if something went south on the relationship with the student. Again, hopefully that will never happen, but we also know that sometimes things like that do happen, and we want to be able to, if there's a problem or any kind of issue, that we are there for support to be able to help you through that. Okay, now, is there any comments on that before we move on? Again, I'd like to try to get your feedback, anything like that. And again, any members of the team can also share any thoughts, maybe something I missed there, but your comments, questions, thoughts.
I think Phyllis brought it up earlier. This is Dennis, Steve. And I don't want to belabor it, but if the student is not forthcoming about their coursework, it's going to be somewhat difficult to give an honest, or at least a thoroughly considered recommendation regarding their coursework. So yeah,
and that's where, you know, and that's where you may have to get some outside, if they're not going to be forthcoming, we may have to end up getting some outside counsel on that, you know, where you say, you know, and at least, you know, again, every situation is different with that, Dennis. And again, I would say if they're not forthcoming, then there's obviously a problem. There's a problem with
how I handled that is that they get a certification when they've completed a course. And so I asked them to make me a copy of all their certificates as proof that they've completed the course. So if they haven't completed the course, the teacher wouldn't pass them on. And so most of us are going to build a relationship with that person and they'll be open. But in a case where they're not open or forthcoming about their coursework, we're within our rights to ask for a copy of their certification so that we can verify they've completed their coursework.
That's good. That's very good. Yeah. I mean, I think they have to understand that there are certain requirements to become certified, and one of them is to meet with a mentor and to be open. In fact, really, the next slide's going to talk more about that too, because this is the expectations for mentors. The next slide's going to be what mentors should look for in their students. Okay, since we're already on that. Again, maybe we should add a bullet to that the student would be also forthcoming with her, and maybe that's something we can add to the slide in the future, that the student be forthcoming about I don't know how to word it yet. I have to think of how I'm going to word it, but that they would be forthcoming about the progress they're making in their coursework. Maybe that needs to be added as another bullet here. So already you folks are adding to the workshop, which probably needs to happen in the future. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Any other comments or thoughts? Again, we'll comment on this in a second from the previous slide. Any questions about that? Any more thoughts on that? If not, let's go on to this.
Steve, I would just
Yeah.
had a hard time getting to my mute button, but this is a little bias on my part, but I think that one of the things that we should be looking for is commitment to ABC and its mission. I think we have enough problems with pastors who get involved with ABC churches and are really not committed to the vision and mission of American Baptist churches. So if you added that to those bullets, that wouldn't hurt my feelings.
Okay, that's another suggestion. Hey, I'm not in a position to write these things down, but Leon or Leon, maybe could you write these two suggestions down to add to the slide on a later date? If we could do that, that would be great. Or any one of you can write that down, or George, I don't care, whoever wants to do it. But those are two really good suggestions. Again, this is still a work in progress, and I appreciate those comments because I think it will help even enhance us more.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that one because it breaks my heart when we get our pastors or paragraph for partners and I see churches that it's 0, 0, 0, 0 all the way across the board. You are supporting the American Baptist churches, and so I agree with Dennis wholeheartedly.
Okay.
If I could just jump in here for a moment. One of the purposes, not the primary purpose, but one of the purposes of this is to give these people an appreciation of American Baptist life and history, so that when they go out and pastor churches, they will have that commitment. Part of the role of this is to instill within people that a commitment to, and I think an appreciation of American Baptist life. Not that we're brainwashing people, but that's a part of what we're trying to do here. So hopefully as people come out, they will be more committed to ABC than they were more appreciative of it than when they went in. But we could add that, Dennis, as that is an explicit, one of the purposes of this program is to develop an appreciation of American Baptist life.
Yeah, I think you put it in a good way, Jim, and I think that making it one of the bullet points reminds the mentors of that, the importance of that part of the program.
Yeah.
We have talked about that. I don't remember whether we put it anywhere in the mentor thing here, whether it appears later or not, but we have discussed it. I think it is important.
Which I appreciate this because this is really our first go around in doing this, and this will help us in the future knowing some things that we can, because I'm hoping this will not be the last time we do this in the future, that we're going to be doing this ongoing. And I think those are two really excellent suggestions about some changes and some additions we should be making to this. I think we can go to that next slide since we already have kind of alluded to it. So again, basically what we have so far, plus the additions that were mentioned today, obviously, um, 4 abilities we're looking at, and we could probably add about 20 to these, but the ability to get along with people with whom the student disagrees. I have found in years of ministry, one of the things I had to learn very early in my ministry, and I think this was probably one of the hardest lessons, because you come out of seminary with really unrealistic expectations that I'm going to preach the word of God and everybody's just going to just jump in line and listen to everything you say. Well, it took about a week into ministry before I realized there are going to be people who don't particularly like what you're doing or are very disagreeable. I used to call them sandpaper Christians or black fingers on the blackboard Christians. But I think one of the things we want to look at in students, to realize that, I heard an ordination message once that I thought was excellent. Somebody said that ministry is not difficult. It's impossible. That's why we need the grace of God and the power of God, because if you think about it, it's impossible without God. I mean, it really is. I mean, sometimes I look in the mirror and besides looking at my face, I go, man, I must have been crazy. I think we've all been there. And so the ability for a student to get along with people, they're going to have some people that are not always going to be agreeable. And they're going to be in a difficult situation. The second thing is the ability to keep confidences, the whole issue of confidentiality. And again, Jim's going to be talking a lot more about the boundaries of confidentiality. Also, particularly since you're going to be giving, as mentors, you're going to be reviewing your students. The difference between giving a review and confidentiality. And Jim is going to really be hitting home on that after I'm done with my portion with this particular workshop. The ability to be supportive of others in ministry. That's another thing, we want to see what their attitude is towards others in ministry. Are they extremely competitive or not supportive of those that are in ministry with them, especially in our ABC context and so forth. And then, of course, the ability to speak appropriately, both publicly and privately. I would add to that also in social media, because I'll tell you, one of the things I am seeing more and more from people is how they behave on social media, especially people who are professing Christians. I actually had, and this was, he's not in our region, it was a pastor from another region, ABC pastor, who didn't particularly like a political candidate, actually really badmouthed this person to the point where it was totally inappropriate. And to be honest with you, it kind of lowered my stock in what I felt about that person's ability to minister just by the comments they made. And again, I think if we see something in a student that, they are not using wise judgment and how they behave publicly and privately, and also their behavior online through social media, I think those are things we definitely want to be very aware of as a mentor, that we encourage them to think about what you're saying before you say it, what using wisdom. Jim has been doing research on civility in ministry and in civility in general. And I think that certainly is appropriate to be looking at our students and how are they, you definitely want them to be biblical and to be speaking in the truth of the Lord. But on the other hand, it's always the truth and love, and how are they conducting themselves? And I think, and especially in this day and age of social media, it has become a major issue, it seems, and even within the church. And so that's been something I've been doing my morning devotions. Every day I do a devotion on Facebook, and I've been hammering that home a lot with the people that are listening, because I just see some horror stories. It's almost embarrassing sometimes that they call themselves believers in Jesus many times. You can understand it, maybe they're outside the faith, but when they're inside the faith acting that way, you kind of go, oh, this is embarrassing. And again, I just bring that up. That's been kind of something that's been near to my heart as I've been dealing with that in terms of some of the things I've been talking about lately.
And that's a piece we deal with in the boundary training, a new piece that has been added that when I do it, and other people do it as well, when I do, I really hit hard on is social media. You know, that's some strategies that people can use. You have 2 Facebook accounts, one that's public, one that's private, if you want to rant and rave about this or that. So we do talk about that in boundary training because that's a problem. I mean, that becomes can be a real point of conflict between pastors and congregations generated by imprudent use of social media.
Yeah, yeah. That's a whole different ball game now, isn't it? But that definitely, I think, is something that we can be real good examples of in terms of being able to help people through that. Any other comments or questions on this slide? And again, I like the suggestions of a couple of things we should probably add to that, which I do like, and I think, you know, it's points well taken. If not, we go on to the next slide, and then I have one more slide before Jim takes over. I got to make sure yep, that's where we're in good shape here. There are just a couple of additional issues that I want to talk about. First of all is the fine line of confidentiality and giving feedback to the Association of Lay Studies Committee. Again, Jim is going to be talking a lot about confidentiality and the difference between confidentiality and giving feedback, because, you know, there's that fine line. And then another issue would be what happens if things don't work out between the student and the mentor. And again, that's where your Association Lay Studies Committee can be supportive, or the region. I mean, if it's something where maybe you really need some, I would really encourage you as mentors, if you really feel that you need to get some outside counsel, you know, I don't hesitate to, to contact, Leon's our chair. You know, if there's something that's an issue, if you don't have a Association's Lay Studies Committee, and there's, and we hope that never happens, but it's always possible. And again, don't try to do it alone. Don't try to navigate those waters by yourself if there should be a problem between the student and mentor. So again, I just want to reiterate that we are here to really kind of help you and to be a guide for you. So I just want to just share that with you. I really like this quote from Jeremy Spencer. Jeremy, of course, he's on the Living Waters Association, is very articulate and always thinking. So he's our thinker. But I really like this quote that he had. He had sent a whole bunch of recommendations to our committee, and we looked at some of them. But this quote it really intrigued me, and I think it's also a great quote. And this is really in a nutshell what we have talked about today so far. And let me just read that. I really think that successful mentorship does require preparation on the part of the mentor. One can't just show up. A person who decides to mentor also needs to think about topics that will be helpful to cover. Some of those might include preaching, conflicts, relationships with the congregation, vision casting, strengths and weaknesses, working with persons during times of grief, congregational expectations, developing successful ministry habits, aspect of the code of ethics, and other topics. Each mentor pastor will have certain things that he or she may wish to discuss. And that's a quote from Jeremy Spencer from the Odessa Baptist Church. I think that's just really in a nutshell, really, I think kind of shows the spirit of what being a mentor is about. And I just really like that quote. Any comments or thoughts or any more questions before we move on to Jim's portion of this workshop? No comments, questions? If not, Jim, take it away. It's yours.
As a mentor, I think you're being asked to do 4 different jobs or play 4 different roles, which can be in tension with one another. The first thing is you're asked to be a mentor and a support person to the student, which means you're asked to identify potential in that student, to be that student's biggest fan, to build this relationship of trust. And so that's your role. I think your primary role is to be supportive of this student. but you're also going to be asked to report to the Associational Lay Studies Committee on this person's readiness for ministry. And that can be seen as being in tension with being this student's number one supporter and fan. The student may also put you down as a reference on the resume. And so as they talk with churches, you may get a call from a church asking you about their readiness for ministry, their strengths and weaknesses. And I may call you up and say, you know, we have a church that is sort of this and this and this. Do you think this person is ready for, for ministry? And so you're going to be asked to give feedback and an assessment on the student. But you also are being asked to maintain a level of confidentiality with this student. And so how do you negotiate that? And it's important, confidentiality is the basis of trust, which then leads to honesty and vulnerability. And so it's very important that the student feels safe with you and that they can share things with you. And part of your role is to be an advocate to get them into ministry. So I think when you're trying to balance these two things, you have to use judgment and reflection. And anyone who has supervised other people and given references or recommendations has dealt with this. You know, I sometimes find myself in this position. People call me and ask about a pastor, and they expect me to be honest and candid, and I need to do that. On the other hand, I want to advocate as much as possible for this pastor and not to violate any sense of confidentiality, things I might know that they have shared with me, or perhaps other people have shared with me that were not intended to be shared. And I don't think you don't do anybody a favor. You don't do the church a favor, and you don't do the student a favor by not giving an honest and candid evaluation. The worst scenario is somebody moves into a position for which they are not ready. And then it all comes to tears. The church is upset, the church is hurt, the church is discouraged, and the pastor is also hurt and discouraged. And so you don't do anybody a favor by not being honest about these things. So how do you maintain confidentiality and yet also give fair analysis? I would categorize it this way: the feedback should be evaluative and not descriptive. And we can talk some more about what other words you might use. You might have some suggestion of better words. But I think we evaluate people's readiness for ministry or a particular position, but we don't end up describing things that they did not intend to be shared with other people. So can you go to the next slide, please? So I've come up with just a few examples of the difference between being evaluative and being descriptive. I think an evaluative statement is the student struggles with using conflict in a constructive way. That's an honest evaluation. They would serve best in a church without ongoing conflicts. It doesn't mean they're not fit to be a pastor. It doesn't mean they'll never be successful, but it does mean that they would serve best in a church where there are not ongoing conflicts. And if a particular congregation has a lot of ongoing conflicts, this might not be the best church for that person. That's evaluative. On the other hand, a descriptive statement would be the student got into a heated argument with the chair of the deacons where they did their ministry project and stomped out of the meeting. See, that's descriptive. And if the student has called you up and talked to you about this, and you've talked with them about how they might have handled it differently, you know, how they could have managed this, see, that is a confidential conversation. And that's not the kind of thing you would share with some, you know, with particularly with a search committee. And probably if the student tells you all about this, their assumption is that that they don't want that shared. We had a situation recently where a pastor shared a lot about the pastor's family of origin. And in that family of origin, it was very unstable. And so the person tended to trust people too readily and to get in relationships that were destructive. That's confidential. On the other hand, it is an evaluative statement to say, well, you know, that this person over there through their experiences has learned sort of the boundaries of when and when not to trust people. And so they are, you know, they've matured through that. They've worked through that, and they have, that's some real growth and development they've done. It's very different than saying, you know, well, they had 3 relationships, 3 different people, and they trusted the wrong person, and 2 of those people ended up improving. See what I'm saying? In fact, you could take something like that and use it positively to say, you know, I have seen growth in this person in learning boundaries about when and when not to trust people. An evaluative statement would be the student will need to grow more confident in preaching and will need encouragement. I mean, that's a good statement to say that if this person goes to this church, it's going to need to be a supportive, welcoming place where people are going to give them positive, supportive, encouraging feedback about their preaching. It's another way of sort of suggesting that this person will become a better preacher over time. I mean, none of us get in the pulpit the first time and we deliver, you know, this wonderful sermon. On the other hand, a descriptive statement would be the student's first sermon was a disaster. I mean, the student calls you up and says, I preached on Sunday, it was terrible. You know, I got nervous, I lost my place, and, you know, and somebody said it was the worst sermon they've ever heard. You know, you don't share that. That's descriptive. That was told to you in confidence. But it is, you can say, you know, the person is developing their preaching skills, and so they would need to be someplace where there's room for them to develop their preaching style, which is an evaluative statement and is a good thing to say. The student's relationship with their children is bad. That is simply nobody's business. You know, you simply don't start talking about people's families, about their marriages, about their children. The student comes from an abusive family. Again, that's descriptive. That's not something you would ever share with anybody. You know, the student has shared that with you, thinking it's going to be kept in confidence. Now they come from an abusive family. If this has so affected the student that they're not able to have healthy relationships, then that's a conversation you need to have with the student. And if this, you know, and you might make an evaluative statement about, well, I mean, you really don't want to say anything about people's families or the way they were raised or that kind of thing. That is told to you in confidence. You know, it's an evaluative statement. An evaluative statement might be, well, you know, that this person, it takes them a while to come to know people and trust them, which that's more an evaluative statement. Next slide. But let me also say that what you want to do is you want to advocate for the student. You want this student to take their skills and their calling and work in a congregation. You want to do everything you can to help this student be called to a place of ministry. But again, you know, you don't do anybody a favor by not being honest. So let's, you want to share some examples of what might you give as an appropriate to share and what is not appropriate to share? And before you answer that, let me ask you this. You might also, a good question to ask is, if I were this person, would I want this shared about me? That's a good rule. If you say, no, I wouldn't want that shared, then it might be, you want to think more about that. You also sometimes might have a conversation with the person and say, you know, I might be functioning. I have to give an evaluation of your readiness for ministry. I may serve as your reference. You know, and this is an area that I may be asked about. You know, how let's talk about how I would answer this question with the student.
you know, and if it's something you could see you'd be asked about, and it's something that is not going to be positive about the student, you could talk with the student. You know, I sometimes have done that with pastors. A pastor goes to a church and they're at the church for 11 months. There's a big conflict and they ask the pastor to resign. Now, anybody who calls, most people who call me about this pastor is going to say, they were at the last church for only 11 months. What happened? That question is going to be asked. And so I will talk with that pastor to say, you know, when I'm asked that question, let's talk about how I will answer that. And to partly to say that both I and the student and the pastor are on the same page. We're not telling a different story. But to say inevitably this kind of question will come up. How, you know, how you know, what do you think is a fair way for me to answer that question? So, you know, if you see potential problems, talk with the student about it. You know, maybe the student's been married 3 times. You wouldn't bring that up, but the church may ask, you know, say, well, this student's been married 3 times. What's going on here? You say to the student, say, you know, probably someone's going to ask me about that. You know, let's work out how I would answer that question. So what examples do you think are appropriate to share, and what would be some examples that are not appropriate to share in your opinion?
Jim, I just wanted to say that I think one thing that, as you were talking, when my wife was a supervisor, and her responsibility was to hire people to become visiting nurses into homes, she would always show them a picture of the most dysfunctional home there is to potential candidates. You know, usually there was electric wires all over the place. The TV was blaring. The kids were half clothed. There was pizza boxes all over the place. And she would ask a person, what are the positive things that you see in this picture? And the reason she did that was if they couldn't see anything positive, she says, you're never going to get a hearing. You're never going to get a hearing in someone's home as a visiting nurse. But if you can come in with the attitude that even with all the negativity that was there, that, okay, there was pizza. They had enough money to buy food. They obviously, the TV's on. At least they paid their electric bill for the month. And the reason she did that is when a nurse would go, and if the person recognized that, when a nurse went in and was able to point out those things, then they would get a hearing to have a second visit. If you went in with the attitude, well, a very judgmental attitude, you weren't going to get a second visit and wouldn't provide the proper care. So I think when we're talking about some of these things, when we get into issues of tremendous sensitivity with our mentees or the people that we're mentoring, you know, our attitude has a lot to do with this as well. How do we react, you know, when somebody shares something with us? I think that is part of this whole thing as well that we should be thinking about.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think would be some examples of some appropriate things to share and some inappropriate things to share as you're functioning as a reporting to the lay study committee or serving as a reference for someone?
It seems to me that if our focus is to help them in our relationship becomes built around helping a student get through the required courses, the coursework, you know, appropriate things to share might be a high interest in church history or something like that, you know, something that's related to the coursework, but certainly not, you know, if someone was asked, well, are they really conservative or are they really liberal? Well, that's, you know, that's not for me to assess to begin with. And that wouldn't be appropriate. And obviously anything, you know, as I'm going through training for spiritual direction, and that whole thing of confidentiality is we talk about things that just don't leave the room. So if I talk with a mentoree about something that doesn't leave the room, it just doesn't get shared. That's You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Howie, is that if somebody asks me about a pastor, are they liberal or conservative? My response is always, well, you would need to talk with them about that. Most people's theology is nuanced in different ways. So I mean, it's entirely appropriate to say, it'd be best to ask the candidate about that. It's not incumbent upon us to answer every question. Is there, people ask me, is their marriage happy? I would say, I don't know, you need to ask them about it. I would have no idea. So yeah, it's, and if they may ask, what is this person's view on this issue or that issue? I would say, well, you would need to talk with them about that. It's not appropriate for us to represent people's theology or positions on different social issues or political issues. It's not up to us to present that. They would talk to the candidate about that. And it's perfectly, if there's a question with which you're uncomfortable, I think it's fine to say, I really don't know about that. That is something you would need to ask them. And that can be a way out. And it's, recently I had a call from someone about a pastor. And what I said in the reference was, I said, this person has a real call into ministry. Their heart is as good as gold, but they do not present themselves well in an interview. As to say, any church who talks with this person probably is going to hang up and say, who in the world recommended this person to us? Yeah, but to say, but that can be a positive thing to say when you talk with them. And I didn't say this to a committee. I said it to an executive minister. They don't present themselves real well because they don't. It's a disaster, and they don't. I don't try to coach people on how to dress, but but to say how to present yourself in a way that committee's going to say we want to. That's very different than saying this person. Is not well groomed, not well dressed, which when the committee talked with them, they will see that. But if it's a church that's important to them, they'll say we're not interested. On the other hand, the church may say, well, we don't care about that. Thank you. Those were good observations, Howie. Other examples of something that is appropriate or something that would be inappropriate to share.
Jim, Dennis, I would think it would be very inappropriate to share anything that you knew about a person's health or health issues.
Absolutely.
And also, incidents that may have happened in a person's life, even though they've recounted them to you, like previous drug abuse or
Yes.
alcoholism, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and somebody, you also have to assess, is this relevant? If somebody was 20 years old and they got arrested for smoking dope in Florida over spring break, and now they're 63 years old and they've had no other arrests, you never would share about health. And something else you said triggered something in my mind. You never share about any health issues. And something else just popped into my mind about health, about and if you're concerned about someone in terms of that they have addiction issues, or they are currently being abused, or they are abusive, then that goes back to the code of ethics and the standards of behavior form that they would sign. And at that point, you would say to the associational committee, I have concerns about the truthfulness of these forms they signed. We do have a code of, obviously, if someone is addicted to drugs, you need to say, I think that they have some personal struggles that at this point preclude them from serving. And to tell the candidate that, I mean, that's it's quite common to say, if somebody, don't put me down as a reference, because if you do, I'm going to have to say, that these issues, I think, preclude your serving. Some people have a diagnosed mental illness that is untreated. And at that point, you would have to say, I think there are things in this person's life that precludes them from serving as a minister at this time. End of story. But tell the candidate you're going to say that, call them up and say, this is what I'm going to have to say. Other things that are appropriate or inappropriate.
I think some of those things that we've just talked about are, those are the difficult parts of mentoring, because those are things that you should be discussing with the individual.
Yeah.
And helping them deal with that, and being honest about how, as you mentioned, how you're going to have to deal with it, when you're asked for references or when you have to make an evaluation. So, but, for me, I don't know about anybody else, but for me, that would be the tough part of mentoring. That's where the rubber really meets the road.
And it comes under the heading of speaking the truth in love. But I want to stress, this is the exception. It is unlikely that you're ever going to have this can be a big issue for you. Most of our people in our lay study program, are fine, and you're advocating for them to get positions. You're encouraging them. I had down here focus on skills and competencies, on their readiness for ministry, not on life history, personality characteristics, personal issues, and their family. Now, if their family issues prevent them from, being able to serve as a minister, then you might want to say, I think this person has a lot of balls in the air right now, and ministry, and they're dealing with a lot right now. But even that probably is not something I would probably say. Any other examples of what's appropriate or inappropriate?
Dennis again. Years ago, I knew someone, and I was not involved in their ministry or their decisions to go into ministry, but I was convinced that this person was going into ministry because they were unable to get a job anywhere else. How would you deal with that in an evaluation or a reference?
Well, if the person's going to be a good minister, maybe that, you've heard people say, there's nothing else in the world I could do except be a pastor. Well, that could be a positive thing, that they're so called of God and gifted in that way that they couldn't ever be at peace with themselves and God if they're not in ministry. On the other hand, it could mean I can't get a job doing anything else, and so this is what I'm doing. I mean, the question there is, would they be a good minister? And I would say, if you have suspicions about this person being abusive, or this person not honoring boundaries, this person being exploitive, then you certainly could. I would encourage you to call me and to say, in confidence, I have some real concerns about this person, particularly in terms of abuse, that they would abuse other people, that they might be exploitive, that they're not, that would probably never come up. But if it does, that is something from time to time, we have to deal with. I guess, Dennis, your question is, how, does this person have potential to be a meaningful minister? And in what context can they minister? I have sometimes said to other executive ministers, this person has real gifts for ministry, but they need to be in a position that's fairly low stakes, where they're not going to have to manage, manage the church finances, they're not going to have to deal with a lot of conflict. If you have a church that's fairly healthy and have strong lay leadership and looking for somebody to preach and do pastoral care, this person will be great. If you look for somebody to lead a building program, probably that's not what they would be good at. Any other comments or suggestions about this? I mean, do you feel you have some guidance here, or you need something more?
This is Howie again. I just was thinking that the chances of us, like you said, really facing any of these kinds of things is
very minimal.
Very minimal. But we don't get to be mentoring someone unless they've been recommended by the pastor to the Associational Committee on Ministry, or
right.
There's steps that lead up to the whole participation in the program. But if we did have a problem, would it be appropriate to go back to those sources as well and ask a couple of questions?
I think it would be appropriate to, if it's not based upon particular conversations you had with the person that are confidential, protected conversations. If you get a sense from this person that they don't have what it takes to be a ministry, you might go back and you could say to the pastor, I want to talk to you some more. I mean, how do you assess this person's gifts for ministry and their readiness for ministry? I think that is appropriate. And the pastor may say, well, their grandmother is a matriarch of the church and they want her to be licensed. And I mean, you hear those things, but sometimes I say, would you hire them as a staff member in your church?
Yeah. I ran into the grandmother thing as a regional enhancement team member, so I know what you're talking about there.
Again, if you would not want to ask questions that betray a confidential conversation you had with that person. I would say, remember, you are on the student side, and sometimes that can be speaking the truth in love to the student, to say, I just don't know if you're going to be happy in church, because these are some of the things you're going to have to do. These are some of the challenges. And do you really feel that you are cut out to do this? But do you feel that you now have some sort of guidance? I mean, there's no clear rules. I would say you always err on the side of confidentiality. And and again, I would say you don't have to answer all questions. To say, that's something you would need to talk to the candidate about. Is this the last slide, or did I have another one?
Yes, it is the last slide.
Okay.
So
Then, any other questions or comments about this before I mute myself and hand it back over to our guide, Steve?
okay.
And you can always talk to me. You can talk to Leon Oaksley, or you can talk to Steve if you have an ethical dilemma. It's sort of, bounce off somebody else or somebody else you trust, another pastor. They're sort of, how do I navigate this challenge here?
I think so much of what you just talked about, Jim, is a lot of it, I think, can be, if there is an issue, can be headed off at the pass by talking to the student directly, and if there's things that are really, that are making you a little bit uneasy, then you may have to just say it right up front. I had a situation, this has nothing to do with mentoring, but I had a situation, I did some premarital counseling and was hearing some bad things about the relationship. Apparently the bride to be was cheating on her groom to be. And, I didn't get into a lot of detail, but just kind of having bad vibes about the whole thing. I ended up just saying to the candidates, I said, I really can't agree to perform the ceremony. And I talked, that was a hard thing to do, but I think sometimes heading it off at the pass maybe a way to really deal with a lot of this stuff before it becomes a situation where, you know, you have to do some explaining when you're recommending somebody. So I think that, I mean, hopefully it probably won't happen very much, but this is
Yeah.
just kind of a precautionary thing that we should just be aware of, and just to put it on the back burner, but at least that you have an understanding a little bit about the boundaries between confidentiality and giving a reference and evaluation. Liam,
I know one of the one very early when I was taking lay study classes, there was a student in the class that was hoping to become a lay pastor, and I don't know who made the decision, but it was they spoke with him and said, you know, I really feel that your gifts could be used, you know, in this place or that place, but I don't feel that, you know, a church would be, you know, the best thing for you. And I, in a way, I had to respect that because, you know, we don't want to do anything that would harm our churches. They struggle enough as it is. So even though it's a hard thing to have to do, if you really, really see that this person is just not a good candidate, that's something that we really need to do. But as you said, it comes down, by the time it gets to us, there's other people that have evaluated this person. Because, you know, there's some people that decide that's what they want to do, but they really haven't had a calling. It's just something they themselves decided.
right.
And you can sometimes say to people, you know, you have a calling for ministry, you have gifts, but the pastorate is a very challenging role. What are some other avenues for ministry? We have somebody right now I've been working with for about 6 months. It's just, no church is going to call this person as their pastor. It's not, you know, it's not going to happen. The person, you know, I mean, they feel a calling to ministry, they prepared, but I just can't imagine, and they've not done anything wrong. It's not that they're, you know, there's nothing that they've done wrong. They're just not, no church, I just can't see any church ever calling them, you know, and to say honestly to the person, you know, I just don't know that any search committee is going to develop resonance with you and be able to see you as their pastor. If they do, that's great. Praise be to God. But what are some other ways that you can fulfill your calling to ministry besides leading a congregation?
Okay.
Jim,
Well-
for me, I think Howie's observation was a good one. I really got a lot out of your comparison between evaluation and descriptive. That was really helpful for me and simple to keep in mind. And I also appreciate your emphasis that we advocate for the people that we're working with. So.
Right. Well, folks, it is about 1 minute after noon, and I do want to honor your time. I really appreciate the feedback. Hopefully this has been helpful for all of you. Again, we appreciate you taking the time this morning to being part of this workshop, and also look forward to working with you on any kind of mentoring situation in the future. I know the Lay Studies Committee wants to continue to develop this, and that we get more efficient in being able to present things like this. And if you have any ideas about ongoing mentor training or anything like that, we would be more than open to hearing your suggestions for future ideas and anything like that from a committee standpoint and from the region standpoint. We're here to serve you, and this is really what we feel called to do, is to really helping to develop leadership in our local churches in the 21st century. So again, I appreciate the time that you've taken this morning, and thank you so much for coming on today. I would like to close us with a word of prayer.
I would like to thank you, Steve, for the work you put into this, and I appreciate it. I'd like to thank Lynn Oaksley for guiding our lay study program in a way that we're, you know, introducing this strengthening this new piece of it. So thank you, Leon, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, George, for your work on the committee.
It's been a fun committee to work with, especially when you got people like Steve and George who are so quick and ready to jump on board. It's been good.
I have to admit, when I heard I was doing this, I had a little bit of fear and trepidation doing it. But it's been a blessing to do it. It really has. And of course, a lot with my consulting and stuff like that. It's something I really love doing, anyways. I think it's a blessing to do it, and I consider it a privilege being able to do this. With no further ado, I'd like to close with some prayer, and you folks have a great day. It's lunchtime too, so I'm moving this along. So let's pray. Lord, we just thank you so much for these folks that have come on today as we look at how to enhance our ministry to our lay studies, our lay pastors. And Lord, we know this is really uncharted territory for many of us. It's kind of a new direction that we're going into because of where our churches are at and where our culture is at right now. And so, God, we just pray that as you raise up students to serve you as lay pastors, we pray for these folks who are willing to be mentors, that they would be able to serve you in a mighty way. And we just give you praise in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you so much. And I'm signing off, and have a great day, folks. And
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And George and Jim, I'll see you tonight as we're going to do this and this all over again. If you want to join for us again tonight, you can, I guess. And we're getting together at 7 o'clock tonight for others who also want to be part of this as well. So that's going to be the same thing done over again. So, okay. Hey, have a great night, a great day. And bye-bye.
See you later.